There is a name in gaming that carries decades of history behind it. A name attached to some of the most influential titles the industry has ever produced. And right now, that name is at the center of a deal that almost nobody saw coming. One that has the potential to reshape the landscape of AAA game development for years ahead. The studio behind Stellar Blade just made one of the most significant acquisitions in recent memory. And whether you have been following Shift Up since the beginning, or you only know them from their breakout 2024 hit, what happened on April 1st, 2026 is worth your full attention. Because this is not a story about one studio buying another. This is a story about where the entire industry might be heading. To understand why this acquisition matters so much, it helps to start with the man at the center of it. Shinji Mikami is one of the most decorated game directors in Japanese game development history. His career stretches back to 1990 at Capcom, where he would go on to direct the original Resident Evil in 1996, a game that effectively created the survival horror genre as we know it. 6 years later, he returned to direct the GameCube remake of that same game, and then in 2005, he delivered Resident Evil 4, which stands to this day as one of the most studied and referenced action games ever made. Its influence can be felt in everything from The Last of Us to Dark Souls to virtually every third-person shooter released in the decade that followed. Beyond the Resident Evil franchise, Mikami was a producer on Dino Crisis, a producer on the original Devil May Cry, and one of the co-founders of Platinum Games, the studio responsible for Bayonetta, Vanquish, and Nier Automata. He then founded Tango Gameworks under ZeniMax Media in 2010, where he directed The Evil Within and served as executive producer on Ghostwire Tokyo and the critically acclaimed Hi-Fi Rush. His fingerprints are across an extraordinary range of titles, spanning multiple genres and multiple generations of hardware. In early 2023, Mikami quietly departed from Tango Gameworks. He had already been preparing for what came next. In November 2022, before his official exit, he had founded a new studio, Unbound. Shortly after he left Tango, Microsoft made the decision to shut the studio down entirely in 2024, a move that drew significant criticism across the industry. Mikami, however, had already moved on. Unbound began formal operations in May 2023, and from the very beginning, it attracted serious attention, pulling in veterans from Devil May Cry, Silent Hill, Dead Rising, and Hi-Fi Rush. The team was small but distinguished, sitting at around 53 employees as of early 2025, with ambitions to scale toward 150. For nearly 3 years, Unbound operated with full independence. No publisher, no announced project, no release date, just a carefully assembled team of experienced developers working behind closed doors on something described only in the broadest terms. That silence alone was enough to keep the gaming community watching closely. When Shinji Mikami builds something in private for 3 years, people pay attention. On the other side of this story is Shift Up, a South Korean developer that has had one of the most remarkable rises in the industry over the past several years. The company operates across two very different parts of the market. On one end, there is Goddess of Victory, Nikke, a free-to-play mobile RPG shooter that has become one of the most financially successful gacha-style games in the world, generating consistent revenue and maintaining a large and active player base. On the other end, there is Stellar Blade, the 2024 PlayStation 5 exclusive action-adventure game that launched to commercial success and sold over 6 million copies across PS5 and PC combined. Stellar Blade's success represented a turning point for the studio. It confirmed that Shift Up could compete at the highest level of AAA single-player game development, not just in mobile. And that success came with something important: financial leverage. The revenue flowing in from Nikke, combined with the sales performance of Stellar Blade, positioned Shift Up to make moves that smaller studios simply cannot afford. The Unbound acquisition is the clearest expression of that position. Beyond the acquisition itself, Shift Up has been signaling broader strategic ambitions for some time. Job listings published on the company's website in the months leading up to the announcement pointed toward a significant internal expansion. Those listings described a company preparing to build out its own global self-publishing capabilities, moving away from reliance on third-party publishers like Sony Interactive Entertainment, which handled the release of Stellar Blade, and Tencent's Level Infinite, which is attached to Shift Up's upcoming project codenamed Project Spirits. The language was direct. Shift Up was positioning itself to handle marketing, distribution, and platform relationships on its own terms for future titles. The Unbound acquisition fits directly into that strategy. On April 1st, 2026, a date that more than a few people initially assumed must be a joke, Shift Up announced that it had completed a full share acquisition of Unbound Inc. This was not a partial stake or a publishing agreement. Shift Up purchased the entire company, every share. Unbound is now a subsidiary of Shift Up, operating under its corporate umbrella while, according to both parties, retaining its creative identity and leadership structure. The announcement came with official statements from both CEOs. Shift Up CEO Hyung-tae Kim described it as deeply meaningful to join forces with a world-class development team, and framed the acquisition as an opportunity to deliver the best gaming experience to users worldwide while solidifying the company's global development competitiveness. Mikami, for his part, expressed that he sees strong synergy with Kim, noting specifically that yet Kim is also an active creator, not simply an executive. That distinction appeared to matter to Mikami, who described the alignment between the two of them as closer than anything he had experienced in his career. In the announcement video, Mikami spoke at length about what drew him to this partnership. He described Unbound as a studio where creators are not constrained by pressure or strict corporate directives, where rules are kept to a minimum in service of making the best games possible. And then he said something that landed squarely at the top of every gaming headline that followed. For the first time in a while, he would be fully involved on site to work on a fairly large game. Not supervising from a distance, not serving as an executive producer, fully involved, on site, on a fairly large game. That framing is significant because Mikami's recent history had raised some questions among observers. When he left Tango Gameworks, he stated at the time that his primary objective was to nurture the next generation of developers, rather than direct new games himself. Unbound's early public descriptions also emphasized creative exploration and supporting emerging talent. For a segment of the community, there was genuine uncertainty about whether Mikami intended to return to directing at the scale he once operated. His statement in the acquisition announcement answered that question directly. Here is where the story shifts from an exciting acquisition into something with genuinely larger implications. Shift Up acquiring Unbound is not simply about securing one game from one legendary director. It is a structural move. By taking full ownership of Unbound and committing to directly handle publishing for all of Unbound's upcoming titles, Shift Up is not just adding a development team, it is adding a pipeline, it is adding intellectual property, and it is adding the kind of global brand recognition that comes with Shinji Mikami's name attached to a product announcement. Consider the broader picture Shift Up is assembling. There is Stellar Blade, which already has an unannounced sequel in development that fans are anticipating. There is Project Spirits, a new AAA urban sci-fi action RPG targeting a multi-platform release. And now there is whatever Unbound is building, described only as a fairly large game from one of the most accomplished directors in the medium's history. 3 major development tracks, running simultaneously, under one company that is simultaneously building the internal infrastructure to publish all of them without relying on Sony or Tencent or any other external partner. The self-publishing ambition is not a footnote. It is arguably the most consequential strategic signal in this entire story. When a studio of Shift Up's profile begins recruiting for marketing managers, PR managers, and creative leads specifically to support multi-platform self-publishing, that represents a fundamental shift in the company's operating model. Sony published Stellar Blade. Whatever comes next from Shift Up's growing portfolio may not need a Sony to reach its audience. That is a different kind of company than the one that released Stellar Blade in 2024. For Stellar Blade fans specifically, the implications of this evolution are worth thinking through carefully. The original game was a PlayStation exclusive, first on PS5, then eventually on PC. The sequel is currently listed on Wikipedia with Sony as publisher, but given the stated self-publishing ambitions, that arrangement may not hold. A self-published Stellar Blade sequel could mean broader platform availability from day one. It could mean a different release structure. It could mean Shift Up retaining full control over how, when, and where that game reaches its audience. None of that is confirmed, but none of it is outside the range of what Shift Up is now openly preparing for. Reaction to this announcement across gaming communities has been layered. There is genuine excitement, widespread agreement that a fully funded, fully supported Shinji Mikami project is one of the most compelling prospects in the industry right now. The combination of Mikami's creative track record with Shift Up's demonstrated ability to execute high-fidelity action games strikes many observers as a pairing with real potential. The phrase "gotcha money being put to good use" appeared across multiple platforms, reflecting an acknowledgement that Shift Up's mobile revenue is what makes this kind of investment possible. At the same time, there are threads of skepticism worth acknowledging. Some within the community are watching to see whether Shift Up's aesthetic sensibilities, which have drawn both praise and criticism over the years, will remain separate from whatever Unbound is creating. There are questions about creative independence in practice versus creative independence as described in a press release. And there are people who remember that Mikami previously described Tango Gameworks as the studio where he would nurture the next generation, before ultimately departing and starting over. The question of how long he remains fully committed to seeing this new project through is one some observers are keeping in the back of their minds. These concerns are not dominant. They are minority notes in a conversation that is predominantly optimistic, but they exist, and they reflect a community that has watched enough studio acquisitions and creative partnerships fail to deliver on their initial promise that a measured response is understandable alongside the enthusiasm. Details about the actual project Unbound is developing remain tightly controlled. What is confirmed? The game is a AAA original IP targeting PC and consoles for a global audience. It is being built on Unreal Engine 5. It is described by Mikami himself as fairly large in scale. Development is already underway, and Mikami is actively involved on site rather than serving in an advisory capacity. Shift Up will handle publishing directly. What remains unconfirmed: genre, platform specifics, release window, and title. Given Mikami's history, speculation has naturally gravitated toward action, survival horror, or some combination of both. The team composition at Unbound, drawing from Devil May May Cry, Silent Hill, Dead Rising, and Hi-Fi Rush, suggests a studio built with a particular kind of game in mind. But Mikami has consistently subverted expectation across his career, and nothing should be treated as settled until an announcement comes directly from the studio. According to the acquisition announcement, more information is expected in the coming months. Whether that means a teaser trailer, a title reveal, or a full gameplay showcase before the end of 2026 remains to be seen. What is clear is that the next time Unbound appears in the news, it will carry the full weight of ShiftUp's publishing resources behind it, and an industry watching closely. What ShiftUp has built in the span of a few years is genuinely unusual. A company that generates consistent revenue from mobile, that broke into AAA with a critically noticed action game, that is now expanding into multi-title publishing, and that has just brought one of gaming's most decorated directors under its roof for his next major project. Each of those steps would be notable on its own. Together, they describe a company in the middle of a transformation that the industry will be tracking for years. The acquisition of Unbound is a win for Stellar Blade fans. It is a win for fans of Shinji Mikami, and it may, over time, prove to be something more than that. The moment a South Korean studio crossed the threshold from promising developer into something with the infrastructure and the talent to compete at a genuinely global level on its own terms.